What's up guys, I'm Sean. This winter I've been focused on my Tacoma build. I've been doing little mods here and there, and then I finally put on some 33s, bigger wheels and tires. And I ordered a lift kit, which is coming. But in the meantime, I'm going to shift my focus back to my M3 track car. So I usually take the winter season off because of the cold and the rain. But now spring is around the corner and it's time to get the track car ready. I picked up the fluid from BMW. BMW's a good shop for performance upgrades and maintenance. So for the engine, I'm going to run Redline 10W60. I ran this last year and got good results. For the transmission, I'm going to run Redline MTLV. This is recommended for dedicated track cars. My track car used to be SMG, but now it's a manual. And for the diff, I'm going to run Redline 75-110. And that's because I have a custom 3-clutch LSD. If you have a stock LSD, you don't want to run this fluid. You want to run something a little bit different. For the brake fluid, I'm running Castro SRF Racing. I've never run this fluid before. I usually run Moto RBF 600, so it's the first time running this fluid. So today I'm going to change the engine oil, transmission fluid, diff fluid, brake fluid, and clutch fluid. But the first thing I'm going to do is take the car for a test drive to warm up all the fluids. My car is safely on the quick jacks and the fluid is warm. Now it's time to drain them. I like to drain the engine, transmission, and diff fluid all at the same time. 6mm hex socket. While the engine oil is being drained, remove the transmission panel. Now we have access to the transmission drain bolt and the transmission fill bolt. Make sure that you loosen the fill bolt before the drain bolt, because if you loosen this first and you can't loosen the fill bolt, then you're screwed. So I have access to my transmission, and I also have access to my clutch line, so when I bleed the clutch fluid, it's right there. 17mm socket. I'm going to reinstall my drain bolt for my oil pan. You can use a new drain bolt and new washer. Now I'm going to go back to my transmission. I already loosened the fill bolt. Now I got to just loosen the drain bolt. Woo! All over my gun. That's not good. Bad idea. While the transmission is still draining, I'm going to loosen up the diff. This is a 12mm hex socket. And again, loosen up the fill bolt before the drain bolt. I'm going to loosen the drain bolt. Reinstall the diff drain plug, torque to 44 foot-pounds. I reinstalled the transmission drain plug and I torque it to 37 foot-pounds. I just have to add fluid. Now I'm going to remove the oil filter cap with a 13mm socket. And there's a tiny O-ring right there and a tiny gasket right there. Unplug the sensor and move it out of the way. Cap. There's normally an O-ring right here, but it happens to be right there. Remove the oil filter. Now if you want, you can clean the inside of this with a rag. Make sure that it's lint free, and you could siphon some of the residual oil in here with a turkey baster. I'm going to put in the new oil filter. Use this bag of O-rings and gasket. New O-ring on the housing. New washer. And new tiny O-ring goes here. Tighten the housing. Reinstall the connector. Let's add some oil. This is the oil I'm going with, Redline 10W60. And I add about 6 quarts. But of course I check my dipstick first to make sure I don't overfill it. And because this is a dedicated track car, I only put about 3,000 to 4,000 miles on it per year. And most of that is driving to and from the track. So track mileage is a lot less. And because I only do about 6 to 8 events a year, I only do my oil change once a year. I've done an oil analysis, so I actually know that I can go a lot longer. But changing the engine oil once a year works for me. Alright, I added oil. This is all tight. I checked my dipstick. Oil change done. Now it's time to move to the transmission. This is where it gets messy. I'm at the transmission and I have a fluid pump. And I'm going to pump about 2 quarts of the Redline fluid into the transmission. And once it starts to drip out, then that means it's pretty much full. And I only change my transmission fluid once a year, very similar to my engine oil, because I only put about 3,000 to 4,000 miles on it in about 6 to 8 events. So I added just about 2 quarts of the transmission fluid, and you can see that the fluid is starting to slowly drip out. That means it's full. So now I'm going to reinstall the fill bolt and tighten it to 37 foot-pounds. Transmission flush is done. Before I reinstall the panels, I'm going to bleed the clutch. But before I do that, I'm going to go finish the diff. And I have a new fluid pump because I don't want to cross-contaminate the different viscosities. And I'm using the 75W110. And this is what's recommended for my custom 3-clutch LSD. If you have a stock LSD, you probably want to go with a different viscosity. Very similar to the transmission. Just gotta start pumping away. And once the fluid starts to drain out, then you know it's full. The diff takes just about 1 quart. Unlike the engine and transmission where I only change once a year, the diff fluid I flush twice a year because the diff, I think it's under more pressure and it's only 1 quart of fluid, so I'd rather have fresh fluid in here. I'm going to torque the fill bolt down to 44 foot-pounds just like the drain bolt. The diff flush is done. Now it's time to address the clutch fluid and the brake fluid. The clutch fluid and brake fluid comes from the same reservoir, so it's pretty much the same thing. I've been running the Moto RBF 600 brake fluid for a few years now, and it's worked pretty good, but I just want to try something different. The SRF racing brake fluid is supposed to last a lot longer, so maybe I only have to change this once a year. I recommend siphoning out the brake fluid reservoir first. That way you don't just waste your time bleeding out the fluid that's in the reservoir. I don't completely siphon the reservoir because you don't want to introduce air into it, but I siphon most of it out. And I'm going to use this entire bottle because it's 1 liter. It should be a complete brake fluid flush and clutch fluid flush. So I'm going to add fluid to just about the top. Pump the brakes 3 times and hold it down. Okay, up. Again. Okay, up. So my Brembo 4-piston rear big brake kit has 2 bleeder valves. This is a 4-piston big brake kit I picked up from a Porsche 996. I did a retrofit video a few months back, so check it out. So I have Brembos in the back and stop techs in the front. So I usually start the furthest away from the brake reservoir, which is the right rear, and then I move to the left rear, and then I go to the front right, and then end up with the left. And the theory behind this is the brake lines are really long from the reservoir. So if I start back here, I'm going to get most of the fluid out, and back here I'm going to actually do more bleeding or more flushing. And then as I get closer and closer, then when I'm at the front left, I'm right underneath the reservoir. So by that time, there's going to be a lot of fresh fluid in there, so I don't have to flush it as much. But because I'm furthest away now, I'm going to probably have to do this maybe 10-15 times on this side, 10-15 times on this side. And then I'm going to check my reservoir and add fluid, make sure it doesn't run low, and I'm going to continue all 4 corners. Now I'm on the front driver's side, the last caliper to do. I finished flushing my brakes, and now I'm going to flush the clutch fluid. Bleeding the clutch is very similar to the brakes, but now you're going to pump the clutch 3 times and then hold it down while I open up the clutch bleeder valve. The clutch bleeder valve is right here. It's size 8mm wrench. Okay, go ahead and pump the clutch. Okay, again. Again. Brake fluid flush and clutch fluid flush is done. Just reinstall the cap. Alright guys, everything done. Track prepped and ready to go. I did the engine oil, transmission, diff, clutch, and brake fluid. I also did a visual inspection. I checked the brake rotors, the brake pads, checked the engine bay, make sure there's no leaks. I looked at all the different bushings, make sure there's no issues with the car. It's pretty much ready to go. I'm scheduled for Laguna Seca in a few weeks, so stay tuned for that video. I also have some more mods coming for my Tacoma build. I have a lift kit front and rear, so stay tuned for that as well. Until then, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.